This video is not intended for children. It contains frightening situations that some may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened in either March or April of 2000, up in the mountains in Tennessee. I was working at a German-themed Renaissance festival. During the off-season, myself and most of the rest of the fair's cast went camping up on a hill we called Zuberwald, or the Enchanted Forest. It's where our Fae cast dwelled during the fair's operating season, which began in October. I played an elf at this fair. The area we were camping in was in a clear meadow edged in by surrounding tree line. I don't recall if it was a full moon overhead or not, but it was definitely either a half moon, either waxing or waning, not sure, or full. We had a small bonfire in one corner and various tents here and there. We may have been having our camping event due to a Sabbath, as myself and several of the people there, including the owners of the fair and property, are pagan. But we also had Christians there too. I spent a couple of fascinating hours sitting around the fire, listening to conversations on this or that, warming my feet through my boots. But eventually I got up with some of my friends who were all around my age of 17, for whatever reason, and we ended up at the edge of the tree line that led over the hill and down towards the castle and fairgrounds below. Just inside the dark tree line, several of us noticed a long and winding line of small, glowing blue lights, bobbing and floating along through the woods. They were everywhere, from a few inches off the ground to a couple of feet, and were just glowing blue lights, like blue LED lights. I and about 3 other people stood just outside the tree line watching this and whispering to each other about what these could be. In their course, the line of these lights bent closer to the edge of the tree line, and several of these lights floated out into the clearing, to where we were standing. They floated towards us, and then within a couple of feet of us, blinked out. The other lights, though still moving between the trees, weren't in a strict line, but did keep together in a rough semblance of a march or parade, with some meandering off to the sides here and there. This put me very much in mind of paintings and descriptions of trooping fairies through the woods holding little lanterns aloft. Only these were blue lights, and we saw nothing other than blue lights, no accompanying little figures. We called over some of the adults who stood for a while watching the procession with us, but most seemed to dismiss them as bugs, while a few others seemed curious but not terribly excited, as though they'd seen this before. I was later informed that often lights of green, yellow, gold, red, orange, and even occasionally purple and white were spotted late at night up high in the trees, just blinking in and out and floating around. One of the adults claimed they were just night crawlers, but in my later online research, I found no bugs that matched these lights or their behaviors. The owners of this fair lived on the property in a small castle and often performed pagan rituals around the property, especially up in the area we were camping. And I later found out strange experiences were common on the property. I didn't feel afraid, just very curious and excited. We didn't chase after the lights, we kept our respectful distance and just stood still, watching them. They eventually trailed off through the trees deeper into the woods till out of sight, all the while staying low to the ground and the underbrush, but winding around trees and large rocks. The next day, one of my friends told me that in addition to the blue lights, later that night, as most people were in their tents, he saw a large black humanoid shadow slipping in and out of view around the tents. He said this shadow couldn't have been cast by anyone near the fire due to the distance from the now low-burning flames. Plus, the tents would have obscured the light between the fire and this shadow being. My friend was cautious of this thing and I think a little shaken, but claimed he didn't feel afraid. I was a little creeped out though. I worked that fair for the 3 years it was open, camping there often, both up on that same hill and down at the base of it, closer to the castle. But never again did I see those glowing blue lights, or any other lights, aside from the occasional firefly. And the fireflies were all strictly a green-yellow color, and very obviously bugs. Though there was one night, the following October, where I had to walk down the hill from the clearing at the top of the Zuverwald, down to the bottom at the base of the hill near the castle, where everyone was camping during the active fair weekends. I was alone as I'd been waiting for my boyfriend to get off work and meet me so we could set up our tent for the night. It was past midnight, probably about 1 to 2 a.m., and I didn't have a flashlight. But the moon was out. As I walked alone down the hill, I kept thinking I was hearing something behind me, keeping up with me. It wasn't loud, but I was aware of it. I got nervous as I have an active imagination and all sorts of images were running through my mind. My instincts told me to run, but because it was dark, I knew that if I did, I could panic and accidentally hurt myself or give whatever was following me more reason to chase me. I walked faster, but continued to keep calm and just walk. I was very relieved when I not only reached the bottom of the hill, but came within view of the campfire and some of my friends. While a bit shaken, I was safe. Ever since, every time I was on that property, I always felt magic there. Like I wasn't alone, whether for good or ill. Today, I still feel a longing for that land creep into my bones every October, once the chill starts to come into the air and the smell of burning leaves is everywhere. There was something very special about that place, and mysterious. I think this was a fairy experience because it was in the woods and it matched old paintings and literature about fairies. I've never heard of ghosts or aliens or even angels looking or acting like that. As an artist, I have a rather active imagination and am good at clearly visualizing and do periodically find myself with my head in the clouds. But I'm not, nor have I ever been, prone to imagining things and seeing things from my imagination while awake. Plus, I was with a good-sized group of people when this happened, roughly 15 to 20 of us, with a mix of teens and adults. Pretty much everyone there saw those lights, and many still remember them even now, 14 years later. They were real. There is the possibility that they could have been bugs, I guess, but I've done a lot of searching and reading about various bugs, and not a one of them matches what I saw that night. I don't for a minute believe that what I saw that night was just bugs. I truly believed I experienced some fairy event or happening that night on the Zuperwald. I was 9 years old and had taken my first airplane ride with my mother. We traveled to her friend's hometown for a long visit at a cottage on a small lake in the country. That evening, after settling into bed, I had to get up for a drink of water. There were no lights on in the cottage, but the moon was at or near full, and the windows were open, so there was enough light streaming in for me to see the kitchen sink and get myself some water. When I turned to go back to bed, I noticed a bright light in the living room. It looked like a sparkler sitting on top of a lamp near the room's large picture window. Then the light moved. It moved around the room like Tinker Bell. I called out to my mother, who quickly came into the room, and she saw it too, whatever it was. She called out to her friend, who came out to the kitchen a few seconds later. My mom said, "Don't turn on the light, look!" And her friend saw it too. It was inside the living room, skipping from surface to surface across the furniture. We were whispering to each other, "What is it? What could it be?" All three of us got a good look at it. It wasn't round per se. I couldn't see through it. I couldn't see anything in the light, no little person. It was solid, but well, like a sparkler, and it emitted no sound at all, like a ball of energy. And I got the feeling it knew it was being observed. It stayed for quite some time in the house, interacting with things, and then it shot out the picture window, out into the trees around the yard. It skipped down the dock and flew just above the water down the lake, and then it was gone. I asked again what it could have been, and neither my mother nor her friend had any explanation. My mother called my father the next day, and he said it was St. Elmo's fire. I was 9 years old, and although raised with fairy tales, I had never imagined anything like this. We all told the story the next day, and although there were some people who believed us, others brushed us off as tellers of tall tales. Other things happened at that cabin that were what you might call supernatural, but nothing like the glowing orb ever appeared to any human person ever again, at least not that I'm aware of. As a child, I was left alone a lot to do it as I pleased. My granny was a school teacher and read to me always. I knew about fairies because Granny didn't want me to sleep with the window open for fear of the little people stealing me away. It's funny to remember that now. The object glowed. It was playful, or so it seemed. I just remember it had a consciousness. I thought it was self-aware. It had a joy about it. It was having fun. To me, that says fairy. I used to be a Celt, but left that faith and became a Christian, though I still believe in the Fae and the supernatural. I've been listening to your channel and love the stories. I'm drawn to the fairies. I try not to indulge them too much as I tend to obsess over them a little. Maybe it's the Irish in me, but I love to study them and their lore. I had a strange dream one night. I was walking in a forest through this path almost below ground. It's hard to explain, but it was a wide path with dirt walls on both sides. Above were big trees with long roots hanging down over the walls. They were big, beautiful evergreens like the ones back home. I live in a desert type area now. Anyways, these trees seemed very old. I was walking along this path and there was a big tree out of place off to the side. The bottom part was hollowed out, almost like a cave, and there was a little campfire going on inside the hollow part of the tree. It looked like somebody was living in there, but I saw no one. I got this dark, fearful, chilling feeling, as if I was being watched, but I was alone. I woke up right then, or at least I thought I did. My bathroom is right across from my bedroom, and as I lay in bed, I stared into my bathroom, but it didn't look like my bathroom. It looked like the inside of that tree, the little house I saw in the hollow. I could see the little campfire and the roots of the tree forming the inside of the hollowed out trunk. I'm not sure if I was still sleeping or awake or in the middle, but for a few weeks after that, I heard footfalls here and there, and the sound of someone else in my house with me, even though it was just me in the house alone. And I had the strangest feeling that that dream wasn't really a dream at all. When I was around 11, my younger sister and I were playing in the woods behind our grandparents' house with our family dog. Our grandparents' property was fairly large, so we liked to go exploring. On the backside of the property was a hilly area with a good-sized creek running along the low areas. I'd always enjoyed taking long walks there. That day, my sister, who was around 6 years old at the time, ran ahead of me and then off to the right over the top of the hill and down towards the creek. The dog stayed with me. As I went to follow my sister, the dog became very still and started leaning against me with his hackles raised. Though he didn't bark or growl, he was focusing intently on something off to our left. It wasn't my sister because she had gone off to our right. When I looked up to see what had the dog so worked up, I saw a woman. She was wearing a long dress and was walking towards us, but there was no noise of crunching leaves or anything. It was completely silent and still. The birds and wind didn't even make a sound. She was beautiful and seemed to glow a little, like a flame, brighter than everything else around her. Her hair was dark blonde and was long and loose. She looked at me and smiled and waved. I was feeling kind of shocked and just stood there staring back at her. My dog made some kind of noise and pushed against me some more, and I looked down at him. When I looked up, the woman was gone. I was attending a witch camp, an event for modern pagan witches that features daily magical training and rituals. We were supposed to spend an hour by ourselves in nature, observing, making an altar, and writing in our journals. My special place was in a wooded cove on the bank of a creek. I was writing in my journal when I saw something out of the corner of my left eye. It was the color of a gas flame, a vivid blue, and hovered very near my eye for a few seconds, then darted away. I thought perhaps it was a dragonfly or hummingbird, but it moved backwards very fast, and I didn't hear the wing beats that would have accompanied these creatures. I still don't know what I saw, really. It could have been the reflection of the light off my eyeglasses for all I know. But later in the evening, when I reported my unusual experience, several more campers interpreted it as a fairy. They reported that I was not the only one to have experienced this sort of darting, hovering blue light right down at the creek. I'm not sure I experienced a fairy. I'm reporting the way others interpreted it. However, considering all the cultural categories of anomalous experiences and the specific parameters of my experience, it does fit better with fairy than with ghost, alien, angel, or some other category. The thing was small, brightly colored, moved very fast, and was in the woods near a creek. These characteristics are more like fairies than any of those other things. So who knows? Maybe I did see a fairy that day. When I was a teenager, my friend and I were really interested in fairies and fae lore. One day we decided to go on a fairy hunt, which involved camping in the woods and searching around for fairy rings. I met up with my friend at her house, which was near a wooded area. We took wine from our parents' pantry as a friendship offering for the fairies and left at sunset, having been given permission to go camping. We walked a little way out into the woods, maybe 50 yards, stopping in a clearing of cedar trees. We each took a small sip of the wine, toasting the good health of any spirits who happened to be about. Left some wine in a seashell which we had brought for that purpose, and poured the rest out on the ground. We then lit a small fire from dead wood since it was getting cold. As the evening progressed, we grew tired and decided to retire to our sleeping bags. We poured water on the fire and stirred the embers, making sure it was all out, and then wrapped ourselves in blankets and lay down. What felt like hours passed, and we just chatted about random things. We'd hoped to have some sort of fairy experience, but I don't think either of us really expected anything to happen. Then, when the night was very dark, there was suddenly a wild presence, a sense of something entirely outside the normal, safe, civilized world. Where we had left the wine, we saw small, colorful lights hovering in a circle about a foot or two above the ground. They went round for a while as we stared in mute amazement, and then, just as abruptly, they vanished. We both had a bad feeling and decided it might not be best to spend the whole night there. We packed up and headed back to the house, or at least we tried to. The path, which had been clear and straight on the way into the woods, seemed to lead us in circles on the way back. We kept going round and round, ending up each time back at our campsite, and the fire pit filled with embers which we had swirled around. We couldn't figure out what was happening. It was a direct path from the fire pit to my friend's back door, and yet every time we walked the path, we ended up moving in a circle. We were both getting very worried at this point and decided this time we wouldn't take the path at all, but instead cut directly through the deep underbrush back to the house. Though it took some effort and we both ended up scratched up by brambles and briars, this time we made it back to the house, out of breath and more than a little confused. We found my friend's mother standing at the back door. She said she had been calling for us for at least an hour, thinking it was too cold for us to stay out all night, but we never heard her. This sighting happened during a time from 1999 to 2001 when other strange things were seen by me, my sister, and another close friend, including mysterious cloaked figures we would spot briefly here and there, some unusually large blackbirds, and tracts of land in another forest which seemed to be there only some of the time. None of these things we could explain. I think fairies are spirits that inhabit the land, or maybe an overlapping spiritual dimension. And I do believe that what we experienced that night was fairy in origin. When I was around 8, my family went to visit an elderly relative, my great-aunt, who lived in a very rural area. She has sadly passed away since then, but I do have clear memories of her from that time. She was a kind lady who many people in the area called Auntie as a form of endearment. As far as I understood, the locals saw my aunt as a kind of witch doctor or spiritual healer, and they would call on her when they had a problem or illness that couldn't be healed by more practical means. I don't know what my aunt did to help these people, but I know many of them felt indebted to her. I also remember she knew a lot about herbs and other natural remedies, and that she was very superstitious. She used to warn me about certain stone shrines and about wandering in the woods or staying out after dark. She would tell me stories about children being spirited away or kidnapped by a spirit or some other entity. On this trip, I remember being bored because there weren't many kids around my age, and one afternoon, when I was particularly restless, I decided to go out in the field and try to catch a butterfly or some other interesting insects. After wandering around in the late afternoon sunshine, I spotted a vibrant red butterfly with orange and yellow patches on its wings. I had never seen a butterfly like this before, or since, and was mesmerized by it. Its wings looked like dancing flames. I followed it as it fluttered over the grass, without even paying attention to where I was going. And somehow, I don't have a clear memory of how, I ended up in the forest. When I realized I was in the forest, it was like I had snapped out of a trance. I looked around and I couldn't find the butterfly anymore. Not only that, but I had no idea where I was or which direction led back to my aunt's house. I started to get frightened when I heard the sounds of people talking. I felt very relieved when I heard this because I assumed the people could help me or at least direct me back to my aunt's house. I followed the sounds of the voices, and not long after I found a group of people around a large bonfire. They seemed to be having a party. They were dressed up, though their clothing had an old-fashioned look to it. And I remember there was a lot of food, what I can only describe as a feast. I also remember the people whose faces I noticed were all very beautiful. I say the faces I noticed because I had a hard time focusing on any of them. It's difficult to explain. It's like every time I looked at one of them, I almost felt a kind of double vision, like the way you feel when you're in a daze and staring into space, lost in your own thoughts, not really focusing on anything. That's how it was when I looked at these people straight on. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw beautiful people and dancing flames. I remember it was night, although it had been afternoon what felt like only a few minutes earlier. But I didn't think this was strange at the time. I hardly even noticed it, like in a dream. There were dancing lights, which I thought were lanterns, and little streaks like sparks from the fire, or fireflies maybe? The people seemed not to notice me at first, but then it was weird. They treated me like they knew me, like I was supposed to be there. They handed me food, smiled at me, and went back to their conversations. No one asked who I was, or why I was there, or inquired if I was lost. And I didn't ask them for help or to direct me back to my aunt's house, even though that had been my plan when I'd first heard the voices. I don't know why I didn't. It had seemed like it might be rude somehow. Looking back, it seems crazy to me, but I just joined in this random party in the woods like it was normal, like I was meant to be there. I sat by the fire and I ate some of the food. I remember it tasted really good and I felt happy, like I was drunk or on drugs. But the longer I stayed at this party, the more sinister it began to feel. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I would notice someone who looked beautiful for 1 second and then ugly, for lack of a better term, in the next. Maybe ugly isn't the right word, just strange, creature-like, with black eyes like streaks that warped and shifted, almost like a face that forms in a flame. I don't know how long I was there. Details feel like a blur. But I do know my dad found me the next morning, sitting in a patch of tall grass at the edge of the forest. I had mud streaked across my mouth and in my hands. Apparently, I had been missing all night, and there were search parties out looking for me. I had no idea I had been missing for that long. To me, it had felt like only a couple of hours at the most. It also became apparent that I had eaten mud. I remember after my dad found me, I had a bad taste in my mouth and I spit a huge clump of mud onto the grass. Later, my aunt did a ritual over me as I fell asleep, maybe to banish whatever had taken me that night. For years afterwards, I believed this incident was only a dream, until recently when my mom mentioned the time I went missing as a kid and was found with mud on my face. I couldn't believe it was real. I became very interested in paranormal stories after that, and after researching, I think spirits or fairies best match the description of what I encountered. I also had a strong sense that these beings were related to fire in some way, though I can't say how. I felt almost as though I'd wandered into another dimension, which is maybe why I was having such a hard time focusing. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was out of sync, though I weirdly felt like I was supposed to. I don't know how to explain it. The mud I ate, which I thought was food, I think might have been real food in their world. At least that's what I tell myself. It's better than believing these creatures wanted me to eat dirt. Why would they? I was just a lost kid. I can only guess at their intentions. I'm just glad I made it back. I have a feeling that not everyone who gets spirited away is as lucky. Thanks for watching. As always, extra special thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for the support you are giving this work. It is so appreciated. If you like this content and you like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. You can also now join the channel, become a member by clicking the join button below for $1 a month, which is super appreciated and really helps out. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census. Thanks to everyone who submitted. Some of these stories from the Census were edited to make them more friendly for narration, but if you want to read the originals, the link to the Census is in the description. Let me know what you thought about these down in the comments. I'll be there commenting and answering questions for the next hour or so. As always, please send me your true fairy encounter stories or even your fictional ones. I'd love to read them. My email is in the description. And that goes for fairy art as well. If you have any to share, fairy music, anything creative related to fairies, please email it to me with fairy art in the subject line, and I will post it on my social media pages. Don't forget to comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and hit the bell to receive notifications. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.